Policing in America is facing an existential threat that will take years to overcome. Officers are leaving our profession at an alarming rate, while at the same time, fewer candidates are seeking policing as a profession. On this episode, we're pleased to welcome a guest who has proven his vested interest in public safety, both home and abroad. Today, we are joined by Representative Jim Banks, who represents Indiana's 3rd Congressional District. We will discuss recruiting, retention, and stability issues for policing. In the House, Mr. Banks is a member of the Committee on Armed Services, the Committee on Education and Labor, and a Committee on Veterans Affairs. Previously, he served as a member of Indiana's State Senate from 2010 to 2016, taking a temporary leave in 2014 to fulfill his military deployment to Afghanistan. I am Patrick Yoes, National President of Fraternal Order Police. This is the Blue View. Well, Representative Banks, thanks you for joining us on the Blue View. Could you just, if you could just let our listeners know a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, I grew up in a small town just outside of Fort Wayne, Indiana, less than 10,000 people, called Columbia City. It was a town where the most prominent and respected people in my small town were police officers. You know, it was that kind of town.
Yeah.
And my dad was a factory worker, belonged to a union all of his life. My mom was a cook in a nursing home. Never in their wildest dream did they ever think that their son would grow up to be a congressman. But here we are. I'm living the American dream. I served in uniform in Afghanistan. I served in the State House. My wife and I have 3 young daughters, so pray for us, 13, 11, and 9 years old. We have a lot of drama in our house, but we're just so proud to serve. And here we are in Washington, D.C. at such an important time, serving in the House, and we don't take it lightly any day.
Well, I want to thank you for your service. The very things we enjoy in this country today are bought and paid for by the men and women brave enough to stand for those principles. So thank you for your service.
Likewise.
Yeah. I want to dive right into it. It's been a very difficult year, 2 years for law enforcement. Started with COVID, and then we went from COVID where law enforcement was praised for staying on job when everyone else was socially distancing and protecting themselves, and exposed us and our families to a higher likelihood of COVID. And we were praised at that time. People recognized the sacrifice of law enforcement. And then 8 minutes and 46 seconds on a street in Minneapolis just pretty much changed it all. And we went from public servants to public enemies overnight. And all of the struggles that have happened through those 2 years, especially in Congress, and that's more importantly what I'd like to talk about, is those challenges in Congress where, so much is placed at the feet of law enforcement. We're like low-hanging fruit of a tree of failed promises. And law enforcement just took it on the chin with all of it. And it has really impacted our profession on a number of ways. But the one I really want to dive into and talk about some of the legislation that you're proposing is recognizing the stability of our profession. To take the demonization away, that part is its own, challenge that we have to deal with. But look at the stability of our profession. We have law enforcement officers that are leaving our profession at a rate we have never, ever witnessed before. We have experience walking out the door. Not only do we have experience, but we have an investment in every community across this country where they've put hard-earned tax dollars into developing effective law enforcement officers. And we're watching them leave and go into other industry because it's just simply more stable. I think everyone in life wants 2 things. They want to know what they're doing is important, and they want to know that it's valued, that it's recognized, that it's appreciated, and we've lost that. And as a result, our profession in policing is destabilized. People aren't taking this job, nor do they want to stay on it because they're stripping away things that provide some protection to law enforcement officers. Why would anyone want to take this job when you're just one call away from being arrested yourself? No other profession is asked to do these very things. So let's talk a little bit about where we find ourselves, at least trying to attract the best and brightest, and talk about some of the legislation that you see on providing more stability to. Yeah,
well, I hear you, and I hear it all over my district. Yeah. Small towns, local police
and
departments.
No one's immune to it. It doesn't matter the size of your agencies. Everyone's dealing with the same problems.
That's right. I mean, I represent Fort Wayne, Indiana, the second biggest city in the state, but I also represent a number of small towns, and they all tell me the same thing, that when I was growing up, a police officer job was a good paying working class job and highly competitive, right? I mean, you know this very well. I mean, 10, 20 years ago, you would have many candidates apply for one open police officer job in a community, and every community that I represent is seeing this struggle play out as it's harder to recruit, record high number of retirements, or police officers just say, I can go make more money doing something else and go find a more meaningful job doing something else. One thing that I point out is, it wasn't that long ago when if you put 10 police officers in a room, they might not want to tell you what their political affiliation was, but probably half of them were Republicans and half of them were Democrats. And the partisan, the highly political nature of the war on law enforcement coming especially from the radical left, I think has changed. I don't want to make this a partisan political conversation, but you are seeing this play out in a big way. I mean, look at Speaker Pelosi. The last two Democrat majorities in the Congress, and two Congresses in a row, they passed bills to take away your qualified immunity and pass other bills that really go after law enforcement officers. And I think that's one big reason why you're seeing what you're seeing in your profession is the political class in Washington really has it out for the men and women who wear the uniform, who protect us every day.
It's a job that they definitely would not do themselves. It's just exposing ourselves to, so many different challenges, and to take away some of those protections. I think there's a huge misconception when it comes to qualified immunity, what it is and what it is not. And over again, the system has proved that it does work. In fact, more often than not, qualified immunity is not a protection. In order to have qualified immunity, you have to be within the law, within policy. And if you're doing these things within law and with policy, then there is a protection with it. If you're not, we look at example after example after example where officers have not, and the system has worked in the process. But there seems to be this perception, and I think most people in the country don't understand qualified immunity. They just think somehow officers can do whatever they want and are free of any reaction or actions to them. And it's simply not the case.
That's so true. Yeah. I introduced a bill to codify qualified immunity, and the FOP was really important, helping us draft it,
right,
showing support for it, and I greatly appreciate that because it's a product of a couple of constituents, a county sheriff, Chris Newton, the Huntington County, Indiana sheriff, and Jason Ward, an Indiana state trooper, who are watching the fallout of the riots in 2019 and what happened in Minneapolis, what the conversation in Washington, mostly by those on the left, but even some Republicans who are buying into the notion that we should strip away qualified immunity. And as I said, the Democrats passed a bill twice in two consecutive Congresses to take away qualified immunity. So these two police officers reached out to me, and I didn't know, I'll admit, I didn't know this. I didn't know a whole lot about qualified immunity, but they made the point. They said, Sheriff Newton and State Trooper said, if one political party can take away our qualified immunity, why can't you pass a law to protect it? And that was an important question because I didn't realize that it wasn't a law. It's a court case that created qualified immunity, and that's why we went to work drafting the legislation. Of course, Speaker Pelosi, who is on the front lines of stripping qualified immunity from police officers, didn't allow this bill to pass. But now that Republicans and Kevin McCarthy is the Speaker, Republicans have the majority in the Congress, I hope we can have a real conversation about codifying it, cementing it into the law. And the reason why is because this sheriff and the state trooper both explained to me that if you take away our qualified immunity, we are not going to endanger the livelihood of our families by continuing to serve as law enforcement officers and potentially lose it all to a frivolous lawsuit by a criminal who wants to make a point and wants to file a lawsuit. And one, you have to defend yourself, hire a lawyer and defend yourself, or two, you might become subject to a frivolous lawsuit.
I don't know a whole lot of professions that you ask so much of an individual.
That's right.
Not only, we could talk about the officer wellness component of it, just the health issues associated with being a law enforcement officer of repetitive trauma, and all of that in itself is a challenge that something that we need to embrace more. We need to have those open discussions. But all that aside, even if we manage all of those, what you're still doing is you're asking someone to take this job, to run towards the sound of gunfire. and potentially recognizing that they're placing, they freely doing, so we're freely doing that, knowing that it could cost us our lives. That's what, we signed up for that. What we haven't signed up for is to be persecuted and have our family destroyed because of actions we're doing. I talk about qualified immunity, and people say we need to get rid of it. So here's the difference. The way that I describe it is this. If I give you a job and you don't want to do that job, well, you make an argument about why you don't want to do that job. Maybe it's not safe. Maybe you break it down and you say, okay, I've analyzed the situation. I recognize that there's a certain amount of damage or concerns that I may have of doing it. But if I'm a law enforcement officer and I get sent to a call, if there's something that happens, there's an active shooter situation anywhere, I don't have that luxury of saying, you know what, I've assessed this situation and made the determination that responding to this could place myself and my family in harm's way, both physically and also without the protection of qualified immunity. It's a different world here. Do we really want to put ourselves in a position where you're asking law enforcement officers not to run towards the sound of gunfires to defend communities?
Yeah,
that's really what this argument is.
Right.
It's not a suggestion that somehow law enforcement officers can do whatever they want and not be held accountable for it. And we've seen it time and time again. We saw it in Minneapolis. We're going to see it. It's obviously the process is working itself out in Memphis, and so it should. Mm-hmm. So it should. No one's above the law.
Yeah, this is so important. I mean, if you look at any poll in any congressional district in America, and public safety and crime is one of the top 2 or 3 issues to every single voter on both sides of the aisle. It's not a Republican or Democrat issue, but we've seen violent crime on the rise, I think, in a big way because of the political establishment in Washington, especially those on the left who are going after police officers, making police officers, they're trying to cover up their soft on crime approach and some of the bills that they've passed at the federal level, that at the local level. I mean, I think 25 out of 26 of the worst crime-ridden cities in America have a Democrat mayor who many of them spoke out in the defund the police movement and the war on law enforcement. So I'm going to go back to the state trooper and the sheriff for a minute. I mean, these are 2 men who feel very called to wear the uniform and to protect their community. And I imagine every man and woman in America who puts on the uniform, you feel called to do it. And I don't dismiss that. But if you took away qualified immunity from all of your sisters and brothers in law enforcement, it would have an even more drastic effect on recruitment and the ability to retain police officers in this country. And that's when, I mean, the American people often take it for granted. You take for granted that a police officer is going to show up if something bad goes wrong or happens in your community. But then it becomes a real dangerous crisis in a community if we can't find people to put on the uniform to begin with.
When the whole George Floyd Justice and Policing Act worked its way through the House, we tried, and we're the largest rank and file police organization in the country. We had some calls and discussions about it, but when it came down to it, we're pretty much just locked out of this whole discussion. In the Senate is where we had to do our work and slow this process down, and let's talk about these detrimental things. There were actually some good things in the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. We can embrace those. That's not the issue. The issue is whether some of them go too far. And I look across this country, and you point out the cities that are struggling. I will say this. I don't want to make this a partisan thing. I think we went through a period of time where we saw something that shocked our conscious, and because of that, we saw a quick reaction, without having all viewpoints added into this equation. And we saw state legislatures pass some legislation that has been detrimental. We saw cities councils pass legislation, and we saw Congress trying to pass legislation on some things that without everyone's input on it. What I will say is not everyone, but there are a lot of them have reversed course. They recognize that some of the things were maybe a bridge too far, that were knee-jerk reaction. We needed to. I don't think you're going to find a person in law enforcement, at least that's not committed to this job. Some 800,000 of us that don't recognize that policing in America is evolving. It always evolves. The very powers that we have as police officers are directly related to trust in the community. If we learned anything, we have some work to do. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, it has to be done the right way. If it's worth doing right. And qualified immunity is a perfect example of that. I know that this is going to be an uphill battle. I know that the House has changed, but we also know the Senate is the other equation to this. In order to get it passed, we need both of them on the same page. What do you see the challenges are going to have with this bill, and how do you think the Senate will view it as well?
Well, Republicans have a 4-seat majority, and you do have a couple of Republicans who might be more libertarian who do openly support stripping qualified immunity. Not very many Republicans though, but even with a 4-seat majority, I hope we can take up this cause to support law enforcement. Here's the deal. We campaigned on it. Republicans campaigned on it, and the American people gave us a majority. Right. Now we have to keep our word and do what we said we were going to do and support local law enforcement. We also need to hold local district attorneys accountable for not
whole another topic.
Right. For not
we'll talk about that one in a second.
Not enforcing the law. And that's a big part of the recipe to restore law and order too.
No question. What's your feel on the Senate? We'll make it there.
Yeah, the Senate is a different animal,
without a doubt.
So we often in the House we look over there and we don't understand what's going on over there either. But you do have a number of senators, I believe, who want to do the right thing. I think all politicians and elected officials learned from the knee-jerk reaction to what happened in Minneapolis. Obviously, it was terrible, and the process, as tragic as it was, the officer was held accountable, and which again goes back to our conversation about qualified immunity. It doesn't protect someone from violating the civil rights and constitutional rights
outside the law or policy. It does not protect them.
So it sort of proves our point about qualified immunity. But I hope all elected officials learned that oftentimes the knee-jerk reaction isn't the most prudent reaction. And now we have a chance, I think, to do the right thing and show support for law enforcement. Obviously, we recognize that law enforcement is often it's a local and state issue, but the federal government plays a role here, I think, in a big way in providing resources and grants and also protecting our law enforcement community in other ways. And I hope Congress figured that out, and you'll see that in this new majority.
Yeah, I think one of the problems that we see across the country is when Congress is able to do something that's meaningful, then I think states accept that. But when they don't do it, you see states taking a wide range of their approach on criminal justice reform, and they're really all over the place. And there's no question. Look, data doesn't lie. That's the thing about data. The numbers don't lie. They don't care whether you like them or not. They just tell you a story. And if you look across this country, a lot of these policies that were put in place have really made our communities and our jobs, law enforcement officers, less safe. Something needs to give. You mentioned about prosecutors. I like to point out the fact that prosecutors and judges both are protected by qualified immunity as well. I wonder how many would take the positions that they are, of allowing people to the revolving door of criminals being put back on the street. When we know most of the crime in our country, the violent crime in our country, is committed by a very small percentage of people. Mm-hmm. And when we effectively take them off of the streets, then we impact crime. When they have a revolving door and they put back on the street, we have case after case after case after case that just shows that they continue their carnage and the damage is done. And somehow prosecutors think they're doing something in the name of social justice, but the very communities they claim that they're helping are the ones that are taking the worst of it. Your thoughts on the prosecutor, the other part of criminal justice system. When all of these things work together, we impact crime.
So true.
The quality of life is there, but when you take one aspect of it and it's not in sync with everything else, that's where our problem is.
Yeah. So again, you get back to what is the role of the federal government? And Speaker McCarthy, on the campaign trail last year when we were campaigning to win the majority, he talked a lot about what can we do to create a database that shows the public which judges, prosecutors, district attorneys are actually enforcing the law and which ones aren't, which ones are ignoring the rule of law. So I think you're going to see legislation come out of the House of Representatives that I think will be very pro law and order, that the FOP and other pro law enforcement organizations will support. Hopefully you'll be a part of helping to draft it and get it right. So I think you're going to see that movement in the coming months, and look forward to talking more about that then. But there's also what's the name of the bail project in Indianapolis? The bail project. You got these left-wing groups that are paying bail for criminals and letting them back out to commit more crimes. Let's put a stop to it. Let's pass a federal law that stops organizations like the Bail Project, which is in Indianapolis, Indiana. This organization is responsible for criminals being let out back onto the streets to commit more crimes and violent crimes, and they've never been held accountable for it.
Yeah, basically acting as bail sponsors without the certifications.
Funded by left-wing activists and
exactly.
groups.
And many of these very people, case after case, Indiana, perfect example, have gone on to continue the carnage. People would be alive today if we kept them off the streets.
Yeah.
I mean, it really is. If you want to talk about the quality of life in communities, you can't place everything at the feet of law enforcement. We're all part of a big web here that ultimately, quality of life, the businesses we have in our communities, all of these things are directly related, are all interwoven. And to have outsiders come in with their own money and free people, get people out of jail so they can continue that carnage. We're talking about law enforcement taking away, having to respond to active shooter situations and these dangerous situations, and we shouldn't have any protections, yet they are.
I can imagine it's demoralizing.
Yeah.
Right? I can imagine if you're a police officer and you arrest the same criminal over and over and over again, and you continue to see that pattern that they're just going to be let back out to commit more crimes. It's got to be demoralizing.
Everyone they want to know what they're doing is important and that it's appreciated. And it's hard to feel appreciated when we have this revolving door of the very people we're trying to take out of the lives of those that we're swore to protect and serve, to take them out of the path of destruction. And put them in the criminal justice system. When the criminal justice system lets them down, we're only one part of it. Yet we get blamed when it occurs over and over and over. So let's talk just a little bit about what else you see coming out of Congress. You talked earlier about the extreme left. It's almost a battle of extremes. There are a lot of people on both sides of the aisle, and I'm very, very conscious of meaningful legislation takes some bipartisan approach. So I try not to allow our organization to be put in a pack. In a path that we are leaning one way or the other. What we're doing is we're leaning for the issues that are important to law enforcement. And I know that it is vitally important for us to have both sides of that. But, we do have a little bit of different Congress this time. It's kind of inverted from last Congress, where that balance is awfully close. What's our path of doing anything meaningful? I mean, let's tell us what can our voters do? What can we do to try and turn the temperature down, get everybody back on the same page? Because this is much greater than a political party. This is really all about the quality of our community. We're all stakeholders in it.
Yeah, I made this comment earlier, and I said I don't want this to be a partisan political conversation. And where I grew up, again, police officers were split pretty evenly between Republican and Democrat. And although I'm a Republican, so I admit I like it that the law enforcement community is supporting Republicans. I hope we get back to the day where it's split evenly. It's a bipartisan issue where we show bipartisan support for law enforcement.
Why can't we all get on the same page when it comes to the safety in our communities?
I remember if it was 3, 4, or 5 years ago when a few I won't even mention their names, but you know who I'm talking about. When a few Democrats from the socialist left started getting elected, they started talking about defunding the police. We thought it was crazy. We thought it was nuts. We thought nobody's going to buy into it, but it really created there was a national defund the police movement. And you had some of my Democrat friends who I work with I serve on the Armed Services Committee. I work on veterans issues, truly bipartisan issues. And some of my Democrat friends were doing everything that they could to let the public know that extreme view doesn't represent their party. But I think that's where we are today.
Yeah, I think it's a battle of extremes on both sides to some extent. Just somewhere in the middle is America.
I think the point that you're making is really important because now we have a narrow Republican majority, but most of us just recognize that America has some serious problems that we have to address right now. Yeah. And you talk about inflation, you talk about how difficult it is to retain police officers because oftentimes they don't make nearly as much money as what they deserve. Indiana, I think our state troopers in Indiana, I think we rank 12 out of 13 in the Midwest for entry-level pay, and that makes it that makes it really hard to go out and recruit people to become a state trooper. Yeah. And inflation is one of the one of the issues that affects all of us, working class Americans. So what can the Congress do in a meaningful bipartisan way to address and bring down inflation and fix the issues related to high gas prices and the daily cost of living, that will have as much of an impact on police officers, working class Americans, that should be bipartisan.
Yeah, no doubt. And like we said, it's a whole bunch of aspects that give a quality of a community, and we're definitely missing them. We talked a little bit about defunding. That ship sailed. We went down that path, and a lot of people embraced it and did a lot of damage along the way. The problem is you can't throw fuel on a fire and curse the very flames you created. That's exactly where we find ourselves in America. The damage that was done during a period of time is going to last quite some time. And if we look at where we are today, no, we're not talking about defunding anymore. You hear very little about it, but in a lot of ways, the damage that was done during that time is defunding. It's defunding in the fact that people won't take this job. And let's look at the end result of it. The end result is we have crime at rates we have not seen before. It just defies logic, and it's time for people to step up. And one thing that we all agree with, poll after poll after poll shows every American, regardless of your political views, we all are concerned about safety and public safety in our communities, big or small. We've got some work to do.
We do have some work to do.
You certainly do as well.
Yeah.
It's 63% of Americans have this perception. They're against qualified immunity. They have this perception of what it is and it isn't. And we talked about what it is and the need for it, the importance of the stability for the law enforcement profession, of trying to attract people into this job. What can we do to educate? Because we've tried, and obviously you look in Congress, there are a number of people that are in favor of it, but they themselves are protected by it. So I'm just curious, what do we need to do as a society to really stop the rhetoric? Let's talk about real facts, and let's talk about qualified immunity and what it actually does, as opposed to this perception that it allows people to act with no consequences.
Yeah, I think actually if you explain to almost anybody what qualified immunity is, they would support it. Yeah. So it's almost it's a name or a term that most people have no idea what it even means. I mean, the qualified immunity protects our law enforcement officers, and it protects them from frivolous lawsuits. So. And it empowers them to go out and do the job that we all hope and expect that they will do to keep us safe. Yeah. And when you explain that to the average normal person, no matter what their political persuasion is, they will support qualified immunity. I find that to be the case in Indiana, where I come from, where there's a whole lot of common sense among Hoosiers about why this is important and the important work that our police officers do. So we have to explain it. We have to explain why it's important. And we also have to explain how dangerous it would be if we strip it away. If Nancy Pelosi would have gotten her way and the bill that passed out of the House twice that stripped away qualified immunity, what would have happened? I think it would have been so dangerous. The people who actually want to serve in uniform and protect us, likely many of them would retire. They would leave, go find another job. And the people who we don't want protecting us, the people who aren't well equipped to wear the uniform and be police officers, would be the ones who would be replacing them. And that's a dangerous notion that we have to explain to the public, that if you take away qualified immunity, it means our communities are going to be a lot less safe.
Yeah, here's the thing about the best and brightest. Best and brightest out there, the ones we need to be the next wave of law enforcement. Well, the best and brightest could take a job anywhere and excel. Mm-hmm. We need them to take public safety, because public safety is that important. And you bring up another thing, and I just say, I don't know if you want to run down that one, but we started off talking about retention and recruiting. Now, I'll argue with you that before we could ever talk about recruiting, we got to start working on retention. And the reason why is because most law enforcement officers will tell you that they got into law enforcement because someone within law enforcement showed an interest, invited them in, recognized the qualities they had, and it was that relationship that pulled them in. They didn't see some commercial on TV that said, "Yeah, I think I'll go be a police officer," some slick ad or any of that. Really, the large majority, and I'd say probably better than 85%, at least in some studies that I've read, suggest that other law enforcement officers invite people to come into this profession. Well, guess what? If you don't feel what you're doing is important and it's appreciated, you're not asking other people to come to this profession. Mm-hmm. So there's a movement across this country, and I've heard a lot of groups talk about it, and it kind of teeter back and forth. And unfortunately, it's happening. What we're doing is we're lowering standards, in order to be able to bring people into law enforcement. But really what we're doing is we're creating an even bigger problem for law enforcement in the long run. Would you like to unpack that a little bit and give me your thoughts?
Well, I think it's very profound, and I completely agree with the point that you're making. I mean, we have to restore the respect to our law enforcement community that all of you deserve before we can expect to go out and retain and recruit the best and the brightest. So I don't take that lightly. Yeah. I'm a leader. I'm a member of Congress, and it's my job to do everything that I can to make sure that we support our law enforcement officers. And that is why I introduced the bill to codify qualified immunity. Right. I didn't have at that point. I knew with the political makeup, it's not going to go anywhere. But I want every man and woman who wears the uniform, and wears the blue, to know that I've got their back. That as their congressman, I'm doing my part to show support for law enforcement. That's why I introduced it.
Well, we certainly do appreciate it, and it's needed. And I just hope before members of Congress vote on this bill on either side of the House, the Capitol, that they recognize and take some time to truly understand what the bill does and what it does not. I just stop focusing on the rhetoric and let's look at the facts. The facts will play it out, and that's important. I'm just curious. Are there any other bills that coming through through Congress that address this issue and a stability issue of law enforcement that you'd like to share?
Well, we're just getting started. We got off to a late start. Yeah. I mean, everybody saw the speaker votes that lasted for the first week, and now our committees are just getting started. So, but here's what I promise you. Here's my commitment. This Republican majority will be strong in support of law and order, in support of our police officers. And I know Speaker McCarthy is already working on to draft a large number of bills that we will introduce and pass out of this Congress.
Well, great. Representative Banks, if somebody wants to know more about you, about your work that you do, what's the best way for them to go about finding out some more information?
Well, we're active on social media, so Congressman Jim Banks on Facebook, @Rep Jim Banks on Twitter. Find us there, join the conversation. We post about these important issues frequently, so come and join the conversation with us online.
Well, and I also want to thank you on behalf of your constituents in Indiana. I work very closely with the Indiana State Lodge and local lodges in the discussions that ultimately led to this, and I want to thank you for your leadership on that as well.
Thank you, and thanks for everything that you all do here is so important.
Thank you. I appreciate all you do. I truly do appreciate just the call and the attention and educating America about qualified immunity and recognizing just how disastrous it would be for public safety and just the safety of every community if we were to lose it.
And thank you for what you do as well.
Yeah, and thank you, sir. And to our viewers and listeners, I appreciate you tuning in to the Blue View, where we talk about the issues that are so vitally important to the men and women in law enforcement who suit up and show up every single day in communities. Thank you.
Be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere else you get your podcasts. To get the latest from the National FOP, make sure to follow us on Twitter and Facebook @GLFOP and on Instagram @FOP National. Thanks again. We'll see you next time.